At the start of April, something peculiar happened in Singapore. The country that was once heralded for containing COVID-19 saw a surge in infections within foreign worker dormitories. By the end of the month, there were more than 12,800 cases associated with these sites. In the initial days of the outbreak, pictures from inside the dormitories showed unsanitary conditions, poor food, and a general lack of organization. Fingers were pointed at the government for a lack of oversight, and dormitory operators for profiteering. Retired diplomat Tommy Koh even chimed in, calling Singapore's overall treatment of its migrant workers third world and disgraceful. While there is obviously legitimacy to these arguments, there is also another stakeholder that you haven't considered yet. Yourself.
When plans for the foreign workers' dormitory were first announced, it caused a huge ruckus in the neighbourhood.
27 people have been arrested after a riot at Singapore's Little India district.
We're also worried about more cases and clusters emerging in foreign worker dormitories.
The story begins in 2008, when residents of the upper middle class Serangoon Gardens estate found themselves in the middle of a heated national debate. Almost 1,400 households in the area signed a petition demanding the government scrap plans to convert an old school into a dormitory for foreign workers. While the initial complaints were about practicalities, questions about the traffic and congestion, the debate soon moved into questionable grounds. In a blog post, Gerald Giam described the scene at a town hall held by MPs. Residents of the estate reportedly complained that they didn't want to see half-naked men hanging about, and that they were worried about leaving their young children and aged parents at home with the workers living nearby. While this might seem like a one-off incident, the Serangoon Gardens saga was indicative of two things that were happening on a wider level during this period. Firstly, citizens nationwide were complaining about foreign worker dormitories that were close to neighbourhoods. In Teban Gardens, after the Jurong Penjuru dorm was built, there were complaints about littering and overcrowding from members of the public. In Boon Lay, residents expressed displeasure about HDB flats being leased out to foreign workers on a temporary basis. In Jalan Kayu, the neighbourhood committee received a barrage of complaints from residents when two dorms housing 6,000 workers were built. Together with these sentiments, there was also another political trend that was developing. In the 2011 general elections, there was a national swing against the ruling People's Action Party. Low Thia Kiang and the Workers' Party even managed to take Aljunied GRC from George Yeo and the PAP. Partly, this was because some thought that the government had stopped listening to its people, bulldozing policy measures through without consultation. Serangoon Gardens and the dormitories were seen as prime examples of that. Here's Low Thia Kiang capitalizing on that sentiment during a campaign speech.
When the people of Aljunied voiced out that they did not want a foreign workers' dormitory to be built in Serangoon Gardens, this is what George Yeo said to the press, and I quote, "The important thing is to do what is right. You cannot always be worried about votes." And the dormitory was built. Dear Singaporeans and voters of Aljunied GRC, your votes are simply worthless to Minister George Yeo when he knows that you are powerless.
Both of these factors have led to foreign workers being located far from residential areas, hidden from sight. Separation and distancing have been so successful that it is not in dormitories where the workers' presence are felt. It is the weekend enclaves like Little India, Lucky Plaza, and Golden Mile Complex that are shared simultaneously by Singaporeans and migrant workers alike. Soon, that too was going to change. In Singapore's first public disturbance in 40 years, 300 migrant workers rioted following the death of an Indian national. In the end, 54 responding officers and 8 civilians were injured, while 23 emergency vehicles were damaged. Considering the abnormality of such public disorder in Singapore, both authorities and the general public were convinced of the need for change. In the Committee of Inquiry's report on the incident, it was estimated that over 100,000 South Asian migrants visited Little India each Sunday. Infrastructure was simply unable to keep up with the large concentrations of pedestrians. Residents also expressed concerns about the foreign workers congregating at the void decks to eat and drink. They were unhappy that the workers would litter, vomit, urinate, and sleep in their walkways. Because of these two reasons, the committee recommended a reduction in the size of the crowds in Little India. To accomplish this, grocery stores, recreational outlets like cinemas, and restaurants, similar to the ones in Little India, needed to be established in the workers' dorms. That way, they would have no reason to visit these ethnic enclaves in the first place. There was an issue though. In order for these facilities and shops to be shifted, there needed to be a critical mass of people in the dorms. Think about it. If you are a supermarket operator, it will make no sense for you to set up shop in a dormitory that has only 50 or 60 people. You probably wouldn't make enough money to cover your rent and other fixed costs. You need dorms with high concentrations of people in order to have profitable businesses in them. This is where the mega-dorm comes into play. In response to the COI's suggestions and the mounting pressure from the public, the government commissioned the building of new purpose-built dormitories, or PBDs for short. These dorms had mini-marts, beer gardens, food courts, cinemas, and cricket fields. To make financial sense, the dormitories also started housing more and more people. Take the quarantined S11 dormitory for example. Built as part of the government's efforts to increase the number of PBDs, the dormitory houses well over 13,000 residents. The government also passed the Foreign Employee Dormitories Act in 2015. As part of the act, a licensing regime for PBDs housing over 1,000 people was implemented. In order for operators to gain or retain their license, they had to adhere to certain guidelines set by the government. By formally setting out what was required from dormitories and actively encouraging the construction of new purpose-built dormitories, the government managed to get more players to join the industry. As of today, there are 44 dormitories registered under FEDA, 25 of which have been quarantined due to the spread of COVID-19. Singaporeans have long sought to benefit from migrant workers' labour without actually having to endure their physical presence. It started off by pushing migrant worker accommodation to the fringes of the island, far from local residential estates. Next, to further minimise contact, migrant workers were encouraged to stay in purpose-built dormitories rather than inhabit shared spaces with Singaporeans. In other words, we created a need for these mega-dorms, the very same spaces that have led to the accelerated COVID-19 spread in Singapore. While there might be validity to claims such as overcongestion and some social discomfort when dealing with communities that are underexposed to us, it is important for Singaporeans to not only hold the government and organisations accountable, we also have to hold ourselves and our values accountable. For these migrants aren't chips in a political game, reasons for us to praise or critique authorities. They are real people with real lives, much like you and me.